I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I speak today not to perform authority, but to confront it. I speak because silence at this moment would be a lie, and lies are how nations rot from the inside. What happened in recent days was not rumor, not exaggeration, not political theater. It was an organized attempt to remove me from power by force and to end my life in my own residence. This plan was scheduled to unfold on the night of the 3rd day of January in the year 2026. It was precise, it was funded, it was coordinated, and it was real. I will not dramatize this. I will not inflate it to inspire fear. I will say only what must be said. The institutions of Burkina Faso were targeted, and the line between politics and murder was deliberately crossed. Those who planned this did not act out of confusion. They acted out of calculation. This is the context in which I speak to you now. To the people of Burkina Faso who have buried too many sons. To the soldiers who stand guard knowing betrayal can come from behind. To the Sahel, where power has too often changed hands through gunfire rather than consent. And to the international community, especially those watching Africa only when it burns. I am not here to claim innocence or heroism. I am here to acknowledge responsibility. Leadership is not proven when applause is loud. It is proven when threats are quiet, organized, and close. What follows is not justification. It is explanation. And before we go further, understand this clearly. What I decided to do next was not personal. It was structural. When Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba was detained in Lomé, the moment did not feel victorious. It felt heavy. I want those listening, especially outside Africa, to understand this clearly. Arrest is not celebration. Extradition is not revenge. It is gravity asserting itself after long suspension. Damiba was not captured in the chaos of flight. He was not dragged from shadows or hunted through borders like a fugitive in a film. He was located, identified, and detained through legal coordination between states that understood what was at stake. Between the 25th and the 27th days of January, in the year 2026, the Republic of Togo honored an international warrant issued by Burkina Faso. That act mattered, not because of the man involved, but because of the precedent it reinforced. For decades, Africa has lived with a quiet rule that was never written but always enforced. If a leader overthrows power and fails, he negotiates exile. If he destabilizes a nation and escapes, time will protect him. Borders will forgive him. And eventually, memory will soften. That rule has destroyed more African states than any foreign army. When Damiba was handed over, that rule fractured. He arrived not as a former head of state, but as a citizen subject to law. No uniforms, no privileges, no diplomatic ambiguity. The charges he faces are not symbolic. They are specific, documented, and cumulative. They involve the diversion of public resources at a time when soldiers lacked equipment. They involve illicit enrichment while communities were displaced. They involve the deliberate financing of destabilization networks long after he was removed from office. And they involve direct links to a plot designed not merely to replace me, but to erase me. I want to say something uncomfortable here. If the plot had succeeded, I would not be speaking to you. And those who would have replaced me would not have spoken of reconciliation. They would have spoken of necessity. Violence, when it succeeds, always rewrites its own justification. Some will ask, especially from comfortable distances, why this must proceed through prosecution. Why not close the chapter? Why not choose stability over justice? They do not understand our history. Burkina Faso has closed chapters too often without reading them. We have buried truth to buy quiet. We have accepted amnesty to avoid tension. And every time we did, we taught the next generation that power is temporary but impunity is permanent. This is why there is no legal gray zone in this case. There is no political misunderstanding. There is no administrative error. Planning a coup is not dissent. Financing assassinations is not opposition. Organizing armed return is not reconciliation delayed. These are crimes against the state, and more importantly, crimes against a society already exhausted by insecurity. I did not order this process because I am strong. I ordered it because the state must be stronger than the men who try to own it. I am aware that some officers, some politicians, and some foreign observers hoped this arrest would never happen. Not because they supported the plot, but because they feared the consequence of accountability. Accountability is inconvenient. It disrupts networks. It exposed silence. When Damiba crossed back into Burkina Faso under custody, something subtle but irreversible occurred. The illusion that power can be reclaimed through patience and violence collapsed. And with that collapse comes resistance. This is why what followed matters even more than the arrest itself. Because once a man realizes escape is no longer guaranteed, he begins to bargain. And that is where the true test of leadership begins. The next moment was not about law enforcement. It was about choice. After his detention, Damiba did not speak first to judges. He spoke to intermediaries. This is always how it begins. Not with remorse, but with calculation. Messages moved quietly through diplomatic channels, regional contacts, and familiar voices who had once called him brother and commander. They did not deny what had happened. They tried to reframe it. I was informed, not officially but deliberately, that Damiba wished to negotiate, not to defend himself in court, not to contest evidence, but to exit the consequences. The proposal was simple in appearance and dangerous in substance. He would withdraw from all political life. He would sever ties with the military. He would accept permanent exile in silence. In exchange, he asked for mercy. No prosecution, no trial, no extradition. Some called it a humanitarian solution. Others called it pragmatic. I call it familiar. Africa has heard this offer too many times. A failed leader promises disappearance in exchange for forgiveness, while the damage he caused remains distributed among the poor, the displaced, and the dead. Let me be honest in a way presidents rarely are. For a moment I listened, not because I was tempted, but because leadership requires hearing even the proposals you will reject. I asked myself questions that cannot be answered publicly. Would refusal deepen division inside the armed forces? Would prosecution provoke retaliation? Would firmness isolate us diplomatically? These are not theoretical questions. They are the calculations that keep leaders awake while others sleep. But then I asked a simpler question. If this man had succeeded, would he have negotiated with me? The answer was clear. He did not seek negotiation when he had power. He did not seek reconciliation when institutions were dismantled. He did not seek restraint when force was his instrument. He sought mercy only when force failed. This matters. Mercy offered after defeat is not repentance. It is strategy. Some urged me to consider the optics. They said prosecution would make me appear inflexible. They said refusal would harden my image in Western capitals that prefer managed instability to accountable order. I understand those concerns, but I govern Burkina Faso, not an image. If I accepted that deal, I would not be forgiving a man. I would be teaching a lesson. I would be teaching every ambitious officer that the worst outcome of violence is exile. I would be telling every network of financiers that risk is temporary. I would be confirming that power can always be attempted again, as long as one survives long enough to bargain. That lesson is lethal. So I rejected the proposal. Not publicly at first, not dramatically, but completely. There would be no negotiation, no immunity, no arrangement disguised as mercy. When I later confirmed this publicly, I chose my words carefully. I said it was too late, not because time had passed, but because the line had been crossed. There is a moment in every nation's life when leniency becomes surrender, when compromise becomes encouragement. We had reached that moment. I want those listening in the United States and Nigeria to understand this distinction. In stable systems, compromise preserves order. In fragile systems, compromise with violence destroys it. This was not a question of personality. It was a question of precedent. If the state bends here, it will break later. By refusing negotiation, I did not end a conversation. I began a confrontation with a deeper reality. Because when mercy is denied, those who rely on impunity reveal themselves. And that revelation changes everything. When I said it was too late, many assumed I was speaking emotionally. They were wrong. I was speaking structurally. In countries that have not lived through repeated military takeovers, forgiveness is often mistaken for wisdom. In countries like mine, forgiveness without accountability is remembered as weakness. I did not arrive at this conclusion quickly. It came from observation, not ideology. Every coup in our recent history followed the same rhythm. A seizure of power, a promise of order, a collapse of trust, and finally, a negotiated exit that preserved the perpetrators while abandoning the consequences to the population. Each time, the nation paid the price twice, first through instability, then through forgetting. I refused to govern through forgetting. The first reason it was too late was timing. Damiba did not seek forgiveness when he still commanded loyalty. He did not ask for reconciliation while institutions were being reshaped around his authority. He asked only after failure made humility useful. This is not repentance. It is survival. The second reason was the nature of the act itself. This was not a policy disagreement or a flawed transition. It was a deliberate attempt to dismantle constitutional order through force and to eliminate a sitting president physically. There is no neutral language for that. There is no softer term that transforms assassination into politics. The third reason was the message forgiveness would send. Burkina Faso is not an abstract concept. It is a system watched closely by those who serve within it and those who seek to exploit it. Every decision I make is read not only by citizens but by officers, by financiers, by intermediaries who test the limits of consequence. If I had accepted negotiation, I would have announced that violence is a viable path back to relevance, that failure carries no finality, that the state can be pressured into erasing its own lines. I cannot afford that announcement. Some have said this approach risks hardening power around one center. They are correct. But power already exists. The question is whether it is fragmented or disciplined. For years, our armed forces operated under multiple invisible hierarchies, formal ranks on paper, informal loyalties in practice. That condition is lethal in a country facing insurgency. It turns every crisis into an opportunity for internal contest. A state cannot survive when soldiers are uncertain where authority truly rests. This is why I have insisted on one center of command, not to glorify myself, but to remove ambiguity. Ambiguity is where coups are born. I am aware that this position makes me uncomfortable to some international partners. They prefer flexibility. They prefer leaders who can be nudged, delayed, or persuaded to postpone decisions indefinitely. But Burkina Faso does not have the luxury of indefinite postponement. Every delay is paid for in villages emptied, in roads abandoned, in children who learn the sound of gunfire before the sound of school. When I say it was too late, I am not speaking to Damiba alone. I am speaking to an entire culture of power that believe time erases accountability. Time does not erase anything. It only buries it until it explodes again. This decision was not made to settle the past. It was made to protect the future. And once that decision was taken, it set something else in motion. Because refusing negotiation does not end conflict. It clarifies it. Those who had hidden behind the possibility of compromise now understood there would be none. And when that realization spreads, it forces choices. Loyalty becomes explicit, neutrality disappears, and silence becomes visible. That is when a state discovers who truly stands with it. Once the decision was made public, the reaction was immediate, though not always visible. There were no crowds in the streets, no open statements of defiance. What followed instead was something more revealing. Silence. Phones stopped ringing in certain offices. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Men who had once spoken confidently began to speak carefully. This is how you know a system is adjusting. For years, a parallel architecture had existed beneath the formal state. It was not written down. It did not appear in budgets or organizational charts. But everyone inside the system knew it was there. Retired officers who never truly retired. Business intermediaries who spoke in the language of patriotism while moving money across borders. Foreign contacts who understood exactly which individuals to call when influence was needed quietly. This network did not serve Burkina Faso. It served continuity of leverage. Damiba was not the network. He was a node within it. When he was arrested, many believed the system would protect itself by negotiating his removal from consequences. That is how it had always worked before. When negotiation was refused, the network was exposed to something it had not prepared for. Finality. This is why I say his arrest was not the end of an individual story. It was the beginning of institutional separation. Our intelligence services had long tracked unusual financial movements, not large enough to trigger alarms in foreign capitals, but persistent enough to sustain operations. They had mapped communication patterns that did not align with official chains of command. They had identified officers who appeared at the same intersections of influence too often to be coincidence. I will not dramatize this work. It was patient, it was unglamorous, and it required restraint. Because dismantling a network is not about mass arrests. It is about precision. The mistake many governments make is acting too quickly. They remove individuals without neutralizing structures. The structure survives and regenerates. We chose a different approach. Once it was clear that Damiba would not be rescued through negotiation, the network reacted defensively. Funds were frozen prematurely. Messages were rerouted. Some attempted to distance themselves from prior commitments. These reactions revealed more than years of surveillance ever could. People expose themselves most clearly when they believe time is running out. I authorized a quiet tightening of internal security protocols. Sensitive units were rotated without announcement. Command responsibilities were reassigned not as punishment but as insulation. Those who were loyal understood immediately. Those who were not became uncertain. Uncertainty is not cruelty. It is clarity in transition. I want to be very direct here, especially for those listening from abroad. This is not a purge driven by paranoia. It is a recalibration driven by reality. A A country under existential threat cannot afford divided command. It cannot fight insurgents in the field while negotiating with conspirators in offices. Some will accuse me of consolidating power. They are not wrong. But consolidation is not dictatorship when the alternative is fragmentation. Burkina Faso has lived with fragmentation for too long. Power scattered among competing centers. Authority negotiated behind closed doors. Decisions delayed until they lost meaning. That era is over. I did not come to power promising comfort. I came promising coherence. And coherence requires that everyone understands the consequences of betrayal. This message was not delivered through speeches. It was delivered through consistency. No exceptions. No back channels. No privileged exits. When people realize that outcomes are no longer negotiable, behavior changes. Some adapt. Some withdraw. Some reveal themselves. All three outcomes are useful to a state rebuilding its spine. This is not about fear. It is about predictability. A system where violence leads to exile is unpredictable. A system where violence leads to accountability is stable. And stability, not slogans, is what our people need. But internal order is only one layer of this decision, because every domestic action echoes beyond borders, and the region was watching carefully. The Sahel does not exist in isolation. Every decision made in one capital is studied in the next. When I refused negotiation, I knew the message would travel faster than any communique. It would be read not only by governments, but by officers, militias, and power brokers who think in patterns rather than laws. In West Africa, there is an unspoken assumption that military leaders are temporary custodians, that they rule until pressure accumulates, that endurance is measured not in years, but in the ability to bargain and exit. I understand why that assumption exists. History taught it. But history is not destiny unless we repeat it. My decision was interpreted by some regional leaders as a departure from that tradition. They were correct. This is not a generation seeking legitimacy through promises of elections alone. This is a generation seeking legitimacy through control of violence. I say this carefully, because words like control are often misunderstood. Control does not mean repression for its own sake. It means the state, and only the state, decides when force is used. In the Sahel, the collapse of that principle has been catastrophic. Insurgents challenge the state. Communal militias replace institutions, and within the armed forces rival loyalties hollow command. You cannot rebuild a nation on negotiated authority. You rebuild it on monopoly of force. Some international observers are uncomfortable with this language. They prefer timelines and transitions. They ask when elections will be held, as if calendars alone generate legitimacy. I respect elections, but elections held without security are not democracy. They are exposure. In Burkina Faso, a ballot box without protection is an invitation to chaos. It does not express popular will. It endangers it. This is why I've chosen a different sequence. Security first, stability next, political normalization after. I know this path is longer. I know it is harder to explain, but it is honest. To the region, this signals something new. It signals that failed coups will not be recycled into future power, that negotiation is not a reset button, that exile is not immunity. For some, this is alarming. For others, it is clarifying. I have received messages from officers across the Sahel who did not congratulate me. They asked questions. They asked whether this approach could hold, whether it could survive external pressure, whether it could outlast economic strain. These are serious questions. My answer has been consistent. A state that cannot discipline itself will always be disciplined by others. For too long, West Africa has been managed through a cycle of instability and mediation. Crises are addressed not by resolution but by containment. Leaders are replaced, but structures remain. I am not interested in being contained. I am interested in being coherent. This does not mean isolation. It means alignment. We are not rejecting cooperation. We are redefining it. Partnerships that depend on our weakness are not partnerships. They are leverage arrangements. Burkina Faso will cooperate where sovereignty is respected and outcomes are mutual. We will disengage where dependence is disguised as assistance. This stance has consequences. Aid is reconsidered. Diplomatic tones shift. Some doors close quietly. I accept that. No nation ever achieved dignity by being universally comfortable. This moment is not about pride. It is about survival. And survival in this region requires that the state projects one clear message. There is no return path through violence. There is no negotiation after failure. There is no alternate authority waiting in the wings. The era of provisional power must end. If this message holds, it will change behavior. If it fails, it will expose us. Either outcome is preferable to ambiguity, because ambiguity is what has killed us slowly for decades. But there is another audience beyond the region. Those who fund instability from afar. Those who prefer fragmented states because they are easier to influence. They too have been listening. And to them, I have something specific to say. To those who operate in the shadows and mistake distance for protection, understand this. What you have relied on is no longer intact. For years, informal networks treated Burkina Faso as a space rather than a state. A place where money could pass without consequence. Where influence could be exercised without ownership. Where instability was not a failure but a tool. These networks did not announce themselves. They did not wear uniforms. They spoke the language of development, security consulting, strategic advice. But their true currency was access. They financed uncertainty because uncertainty creates dependence. They cultivated internal rivals because divided states negotiate from weakness. They assumed that any leader could be replaced, delayed, or redirected. They assumed wrong. The arrest of Damiba was not a coincidence of intelligence. It was the result of patience. We did not act when emotions were high. We did not react publicly while evidence was incomplete. We allowed patterns to reveal intent. And patterns always do. Funding trails converge. Communication repeats. Behavior under pressure exposes hierarchy. This is not a threat. It is an observation. I want to be clear for those listening in comfortable rooms far from our borders. We are not expanding repression. We are shrinking impunity. There is a difference. Répression, silence, opposition. Accountability isolates conspiracies. Opposition will always exist in a society. Conspiracy thrives only when it believes consequences can be avoided. That belief has been dismantled. I will not name networks. I will not dramatize operations. Because public spectacle is not how systems are neutralized. What matters is this. Those who finance destabilization are known. Those who facilitated communication are mapped. Those who believed they could observe without being seen have been identified. And more importantly, they now know this. The most powerful deterrent is not punishment. It is certainty. When actors are uncertain whether the state sees them, they take risks. When they know the state sees them, behavior changes. Some will disengage quietly. Some will attempt to reposition themselves as neutral. Some will test boundaries one last time. All of these outcomes are manageable. What is no longer manageable is pretending these networks do not exist. For too long, African leaders were advised to ignore internal sabotage in exchange for external approval. We were told stability required tolerance. That confrontation would provoke backlash. That advice preserved systems that benefited from our fragility. I reject it. A state that refuses to see its enemies does not become peaceful. It becomes predictable. I have no interest in governing a predictable collapse. So let this be understood without ambiguity. There is no safe distance from accountability. There is no foreign cover that guarantees insulation. There is no internal loyalty that overrides national law. Those who still believe otherwise are operating on outdated assumptions. The world has changed. Africa is changing with it. And Burkina Faso will not be the terrain on which others rehearse their strategies of influence. We are not closing ourselves to the world. We are closing the space for manipulation. This is not an announcement of conflict. It is an announcement of boundaries. Boundaries protect relationships. They do not destroy them. Those who respect them will find us open. Those who violate them will find us firm. This clarity is necessary not only for security but for governance itself. Because without it, no reform survives. And reform, not survival alone, is what our people ultimately deserve. What comes next will test endurance rather than resolve. And it will require discipline not only from institutions but from me. From this point forward, my responsibility is no longer only to react. It is to shape what cannot be allowed to return. Power that is merely defended will always be challenged again. Power that is structured endures. The first direction is internal discipline within the armed forces, not through spectacle and not through fear, but through design. For too long, sensitive units remained static. Familiarity bred loyalty to individuals rather than to command. That is how fractures form quietly. We have begun rotating units that should never grow comfortable. Not as punishment, but as prevention. Movement disrupts informal hierarchies before they solidify. At the same time, responsibility is being redistributed. Not concentrated blindly, but aligned deliberately. Those placed in key positions are not chosen for charisma or history. They are chosen for consistency. Consistency under pressure is the rarest quality in security leadership. This process will not be rushed. Rapid purges satisfy emotion but weaken institutions. What we are building must last beyond personalities, including my own. The second direction concerns legitimacy. I am aware of the expectation, especially from abroad, that legitimacy must always arrive through elections. That expectation ignores context. In a country where territory is contested and citizens move under threat, voting does not express freedom. It exposes it. I will not pretend otherwise. At this moment, security is legitimacy. The ability of a farmer to return to land. The ability of a child to attend school without armed escort. The ability of a town to sleep without calculating risk. These are not abstractions. They are the foundation of any future political process. When those conditions exist, political normalization will follow. Not because of pressure, but because of readiness. Until then, my obligation is not to a calendar. It is to protection. The third direction is positioning Burkina Faso as a fortress of sovereignty. This does not mean isolation. It means choice. We will continue reducing reliance on partnerships that compromise autonomy. We will expand cooperation where interests align without dependency. And we will deepen regional coordination within the Sahel, where realities are shared rather than theorized. Security cooperation will no longer be symbolic. It will be operational. We will invest in relationships that understand our terrain, our threats, and our limits. We will disengage from those that treat us as an experiment. This repositioning will not be applauded universally, but applause has never defended a border. I am under no illusion that this path is comfortable. It will strain resources. It will test patience. It will also expose mistakes. I will make some. What matters is not avoiding error. It is correcting it without surrendering direction. I did not come to lead Burkina Faso because it was easy to explain. I came because it was necessary to confront. The state must now do what individuals cannot. It must remember, it must decide, and it must hold. This phase is not about victory, it is about endurance. And endurance requires a final clarity about what power truly is. Not titles, not ceremonies, not recognition from afar. Power is the ability to prevent harm consistently. Anything less is decoration. I want to end where I began, not with certainty, but with responsibility. I am not immune to doubt. Any leader who claims otherwise is either lying or no longer listening. There are nights when I ask myself whether firmness will harden into isolation, whether discipline will one day be misunderstood as distance, whether history will judge this moment as necessity or excess. These questions do not weaken leadership. They keep it human. I did not choose this path because it guarantees comfort. I chose it because it reduces illusion. For too long, our continent has been offered narratives instead of protection, slogans instead of security, patience instead of justice. We were told to wait while instability became permanent. We were told to forgive while violence repeated itself. I refuse to inherit that cycle and pass it on unchanged. I am not promising perfection. I am promising presence. I will live under the same constraints I ask of others. I will accept scrutiny where it strengthens institutions. I will correct course when reality proves me wrong. But I will not pretend that compromise with violence produces peace. It produces delay. My commitment is simple, and it is personal. I will live in a way that does not require escape. I will govern in a way that does not depend on forgetting. And I will protect Burkina Faso not as a possession, but as a responsibility temporarily entrusted to me. To the people of Burkina Faso, I ask for patience without silence. Challenge us where we err. Hold us to the standard we claim. But do not confuse discipline with betrayal of freedom. To the soldiers, I ask for loyalty not to me, but to coherence. A fragmented force cannot defend a united people. To the Sahel, I say this moment is not about dominance. It is about survival with dignity. And to those watching from afar, especially in the United States and Nigeria, I offer neither reassurance nor defiance, only honesty. Africa is not searching for saviors. It is searching for systems that do not collapse under pressure. If you agree with this direction, stay with this conversation. If you question it, remain engaged. Indifference is the only position that helps instability. Listen closely, think critically, and if this reflection resonates with you, make your presence known, because silence too shapes outcomes. The future of this continent will not be decided by one leader, one speech, or one moment. It will be decided by whether truth is spoken when it is inconvenient, and whether responsibility is accepted when it is heavy. I intend to carry that weight as long as I am able, not for power, but so that one day, power is no longer the question our children inherit.